Chapter 26. Adele's mood was steadily souring as she paced around her office in Washington, the once serene environment now suffused with tension. Her high heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, adding to the intensity of the moment. She had just thrown her tea across the room, aimed at Jerry, of course, and the force of her action shattered the glass wall of her office. The sound echoed through the hallways, leaving everyone within earshot pausing in their tracks. "What do you mean the results you found on Miss Thornhill are inconclusive?" Adele's voice was venomous, filled with frustration and impatience. Jerry, ever the insufferable presence, stood casually with his hands shoved into his pockets, looking as unfazed as ever. "Exactly that. She's clean." Adele's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "Someone just unlocked a Hyde in Jericho. There have been 2 victims so far, each with missing body parts." Jerry shrugged nonchalantly. "Well, why don't we just get the kid?" Adele's hand clenched into a fist, her gaze darkening. "Are you insane? If we lock him up, we'd never know who unlocked him." Without further warning, she grabbed the saucer from her desk and hurled it at him with furious precision. Jerry managed to dodge, but the saucer crashed into the glass wall on the other side of her office, leaving a spiderweb of cracks in its wake. The noise startled everyone outside, and now they were all uncomfortably aware of the escalating tension in her office. Adele's voice, impossibly loud, rang through the space. "We're talking about something bigger than some juvenile delinquent, Jerry. Don't you see what's happening?" He simply adjusted his posture, leaning against the doorway with a smirk. Now. That didn't mean we don't find something. That 90-year-old woman who bought the old Gates mansion? Teresa L. Glau? Her tax records only go back 10 years. Adele froze for a moment, the words hitting her like a revelation. "She's an alias." Jerry shrugged again, not even remotely shaken by her ire. "And, Laura Gates, the youngest daughter who was presumed dead? Turns out, they never recovered her body." He spoke casually, his eyes glinting with a knowing gleam. "The records are all odd." Adele tapped her fingers against the desk, her mind clicking into place as she began to piece things together. Laura Gates. The presumed dead daughter. She buys the family home back under the alias of a 90-year-old woman. And now she's using an outcast to terrorize the town of Jericho? Jerry nodded. "And no one knows where she's really been for the past 30 years. Not to mention the victims, all the bodies were severed, but there were body parts missing, surgically removed. Something's off here, Adele." "We're missing something here, Jerry." Adele's voice lowered into a dangerous, nagging tone as she leaned back in her chair. Her calculating mind had already moved ahead, already looking at the bigger picture. "Wait," Jerry said, a sudden realization hitting him like a thunderclap. "I found something else, too. An old 16th century spell book. It was stolen from a museum." He smiled grimly. "That could be the key." "Right," Adele said, rolling her eyes. Jerry nodded and said, "Let me guess, you've got some inside scoop on that as well." "I do." Adele didn't miss a beat. "My cousin stole it and gave it to my grandmother for her birthday." "Now, that's a fun family secret, isn't it?" she said, clearly unbothered by the mention of stolen goods. Jerry sighed dramatically. "Aren't you full of surprises?" Adele raised an eyebrow. "Let's just focus on this problem, Jerry. I'm not planning on giving it back. The replacement's already a replica at Pilgrim World. But the real question is..." Jerry interrupted her again. "What are you going to do with all of this?" Adele leaned forward, the anger in her eyes giving way to a colder, more calculating edge. "I'm going to mess with their plan." "What else?" Jerry gave her an amused look, though he was clearly intrigued. "And how do you plan on doing that?" "Psychological warfare, Jerry." She flashed a knowing smile. "I'll transfer the name of the property rights of the Gates mansion to me, and then I'll be on my way." Jerry's eyes widened slightly. "What if Teresa L. Glau comes forward and sues you?" Adele smirked, her voice silky. Please. You know you can't buy property using an alias. The government will repossess it. Jerry didn't immediately reply, but after a moment's pause, he nodded begrudgingly. As long as you know what you're doing. He turned and walked out of her office, clearly done with the theatrics of the conversation. But Adele was already lost in thought again, running through the plan in her mind. She had a good feeling about her approach. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. As the fall semester began at Nevermore Academy, the students had gathered in the auditorium, eager for the typical start-of-year announcements. It was a bright, chilly day, and the air was thick with anticipation as students reconnected with old friends, shared stories of their summers, and braced for the challenges ahead. But no one expected what was about to unfold. Wednesday Addams, dressed in her signature dark, monochrome attire, had her mind set on one thing and one thing only, making Miss Thornhill pay for unleashing Tyler's Hyde. If she had to bury the woman 6 feet under, she'd make it happen. With a relentless resolve, she scanned the room, her eyes flickering from one person to another. Pugsley, as always, was by her side, fidgeting with his flask, excited to be back. But Wednesday's focus was unshakable. Pugsley, a voice called. It was Eugene, the awkward boy with curly hair and thick glasses, grinning as he approached them. Eugene, Wednesday acknowledged with her usual flat tone, her eyes not leaving the sheriff on the stage. Morticia and Gomez, meanwhile, stood nearby, chatting idly. Their faces were filled with longing as they looked for their niece, Adele. It was clear they hoped to catch up with her before they had to leave. My love, Morticia said, a touch of melancholy in her voice. It seems Adele is running late. I was so hoping to see her. Ah, darling, don't worry, Gomez replied, patting her hand with his usual enthusiasm. We'll see her during Parents' Weekend. It's only a matter of time. But Morticia's tone remained somber. You do your worst now, Wednesday. Pugsley, do not disappoint us. Always, mother, Pugsley replied with a mischievous glint in his eye. Suddenly, Eden, one of Wednesday's few friends at Nevermore, rushed up to her, eager to share some fresh gossip. Wednesday, did you hear? Bianca and Xavier just broke up, literally, just now. I'm telling you, things are heating up around here. Please tell me you're not still with Tyler. Unfortunately, I am, Wednesday replied flatly, her voice dripping with disinterest. Eden's eyes widened as she realized something. Wait, that means you and Tyler are the longest-running couple at Nevermore now. You're coming up on 2 years together. Congratulations, I guess? Wednesday didn't answer, her thoughts still preoccupied by the task at hand. She wasn't here to celebrate relationships, she was here to make someone pay. When the students finally filed into the auditorium, the usual air of excitement quickly shifted to confusion. Sheriff Galvin, the local lawman, was on stage, and his presence only added to the already ominous atmosphere. Eden leaned in, whispering. I heard that dead bodies have been turning up in the woods. All chopped up and scattered around. They say it's a bear attack. Maybe that's why the sheriff's here. Wednesday didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the sheriff as his gaze slowly met hers. He clearly remembered the summer incident all too well, when he had caught his son in bed with her. The memory was enough to make his blood simmer, but he didn't let it show. And Wednesday was too focused on something else. The sheriff finished his speech. So I expect all of you to stay out of the woods and stay out of trouble, he said, his eyes locking with Wednesday's, a strained silence passing between them. As soon as he stepped off stage, the heavy click of heels on marble signaled the arrival of none other than Adele. Her 1959 Cadillac, sleek and menacing, had just pulled up outside the auditorium, its dark, polished surface reflecting the morning light. Adele stepped out of the car with an air of absolute confidence. Her black dress, tailored blazer, and Chanel boots stood out even among Nevermore's eccentric students. Her hair was sleek, shorter than usual, and her bold red lipstick matched the fire in her eyes. She walked toward the auditorium, her heels clicking against the cobblestones as if she owned the place, because, in her mind, she did. As she entered the auditorium, the crowd's energy shifted. Sheriff Galvin had just finished his speech, but all attention now turned to Adele. Principal Weems, a stiff but welcoming figure, greeted her with a smile. "Miss Addams, glad you could join us," Weems said, her tone polite but clearly noticing the energy Adele brought with her. "Oh, really?" Adele replied with a playful smirk. "The judge in Washington certainly wasn't too happy to see me. He sent me right back here as soon as the court case was over." The other teachers, Coach Vlad, Miss Thornhill, and the others, exchanged uneasy glances, wondering just what Adele was about to do. But Adele's eyes were locked on Miss Thornhill, her expression calculating. She could sense the woman's unease, and that only made her more determined. Adele grabbed the microphone with a flourish and smiled as the room fell silent. "I have news, kids. I have here in my hand the rights to the old Gates mansion." A collective gasp went through the students. Sheriff Galvin, who had been standing near the stage, took a step forward and snatched the folder from her hand, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What?" He looked at her with incredulity. "How did you get that?" Adele's lips curled into a small, victorious smile. She paused for dramatic effect before answering. "Oh, it's simple really. The property was bought by a woman named Teresa L. Glau, an elderly woman in her 90s. Sounds suspicious, right? Well, I did a little digging. Her tax records only go back 10 years, indicating that the woman is using a false identity. Legal lesson, kids. You can't buy property using an alias. So I decided to buy it instead. And now, since the transaction was made under fraudulent means, the government can repossess it. And since it's mine now," she turned toward the students with a mischievous smile. "If you want to throw a party or have a date night with dinner and a movie, just come to me. I'll give you permission, Wednesday," she added, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The room erupted into applause as the students, some laughing, others clearly thrilled, cheered. Eden, who had been watching with wide eyes, raised her hand eagerly. "Wait, throw parties? You mean, like, real parties?" "That's right," Adele said, a wicked gleam in her eye. "I don't lie to kids." Wednesday, though, was less than impressed. As Adele finished her speech, Wednesday muttered to herself, "Might have to find another location." Adele caught her eye, however, and gave her cousin a cheeky smile. "Don't worry, Wednesday. I'll have a sign-up sheet so you can book your date nights in advance." Wednesday rolled her eyes, but kept her thoughts to herself. However, she couldn't help but notice how Adele's gaze flickered back to Miss Thornhill, a subtle but unmistakable look of triumph in her eyes. It wasn't just the Gates mansion that mattered, it was the game they were playing with the woman who had unlocked Tyler's Hyde. "Sheriff," Adele said with a teasing tone, "since I have some free time, would you mind escorting me to see my new property? Right now would be perfect, if you don't mind. I have fencing practice this afternoon, unless, of course, you have somewhere else to be." Sheriff Galvin sighed but nodded. "No, I'll be happy to escort you, Miss Addams." Adele smiled. "Thank you, Sheriff. Shall we go now?" And so, with a final, lingering glance at Miss Thornhill, Adele and Sheriff Galvin left the auditorium, making their way to the Cadillac. As they drove toward the old Gates mansion, Adele's mind raced with plans and strategies. She wasn't just settling for a mansion, she was planting a seed, one that would eventually force everyone in Jericho to face the truth. Wednesday Addams had spent the entire day with her eyes locked on Miss Thornhill, her gaze piercing and calculating. While the other students and faculty went about their usual routines, Wednesday's thoughts remained focused on one thing: revenge. The unsettling events of the previous summer, when Miss Thornhill had unleashed the terrifying, destructive force of Tyler's Hyde, still haunted her. The woman had to be stopped. To keep an eye on her target, Wednesday had enlisted the help of Thing, the Addams family's ever-loyal sentient disembodied hand. Thing was discreet, precise, and able to follow Miss Thornhill without drawing attention. Wednesday trusted Thing to gather any details that might aid in her plans, though she doubted it would be anything as simple as watching and waiting. This time, the Addams family would act decisively. Meanwhile, Sheriff Galvin and Adele were making their way through the dusty halls of the old Gates mansion. They were both on edge, a shared sense of unease pulling them through the darkened corridors. A few moments ago, they'd discovered something that left them both reeling: preserved body parts in glass containers, neatly arranged as though on display. It was chilling. It was wrong. And it certainly wasn't the work of a bear. "You really think that the victims were being eaten by a bear, Sheriff?" Adele asked with a teasing, but unsettling smirk. Her eyes flicked over the gruesome scene, but her tone was almost playful, as if daring him to deny what they both knew. Sheriff Galvin hesitated before answering. "You're right," he said, his voice low and reluctant. "But you're not allowed to say that, because then I'll be discriminating against your people." Adele raised an eyebrow. "You say you hate us, but then you married an outcast yourself, didn't you?" She stared at him, her expression calm yet piercing. "Oh, come on. I went to school here. Your wife made me my latte for my coffee run, remember? I was friends with your wife, for crying out loud. Too bad Tyler doesn't even remember me. He's really grown a lot, though. Too bad you decided to put her in a mental institution when you found out the truth." Sheriff Galvin's face flushed with frustration, his hands gripping tighter around his flashlight. "Hey, you have no right to judge me. You weren't there," he snapped, defensive. Adele was unfazed. "All right. Are you also going to put Tyler in a mental asylum if he turns out to be like his mom?" she asked seriously, her voice quiet but full of intent. For a moment, Sheriff Galvin took a step closer, his face inches from Adele's. His teeth ground together as he growled, "You shut up." Adele blinked slowly, her face as unreadable as ever. "You know, I've seen many cases like yours," she began, her voice smooth. "Where your partner, an outcast, wasn't completely honest. Sometimes, us outcasts lie to ourselves. We tell ourselves that if we can keep the secret long enough, if we're honest about it, maybe our partner will accept us. But the truth is, the best marriages are built on lies. When you're seeing your partner through tinted glasses." Her words hung in the air, and without waiting for his response, Adele turned and made her way down to the basement, where the true horror waited. Sheriff Galvin followed her, his frustration still simmering beneath the surface. He'd hoped to bury the past, but Adele was peeling back every layer, exposing things he wasn't ready to confront. In the basement, the dim light of their flashlights illuminated the preserved body parts in glass jars. Disgust filled the sheriff's face, and he quickly reached for his phone, dialing the police station. "I'm calling this in," he muttered, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to regain his composure. Adele glanced at the body parts with a cold, almost clinical detachment. "I don't think you're dealing with a bear, Sheriff. Looks more like a crafty serial killer with a flair for the dramatic," she remarked, her tone darkly amused. The sheriff sighed, looking around the room. "This is bad. Real bad." Within minutes, the rest of the sheriff's department surrounded the mansion. It wasn't long before Adele and Sheriff Galvin were back outside, standing by the hood of her car. The air was thick with the weight of what they had uncovered. "Looks like I might have to do a little more digging into this, Teresa L. Glau," Galvin said as he approached her, his face grim. "No need," Adele replied with her usual nonchalance. "I have a pretty good idea who it might be." Galvin raised an eyebrow, curious. "Who?" Adele's expression grew serious, and she glanced toward the mansion. "Who else would take an interest in this place?" "Laura Gates," she said with a cold certainty. Galvin froze. "That's impossible. She died over 30 years ago." Adele shook her head. "No. She was presumed dead, but they never actually found her body. I checked." Sheriff Galvin frowned, struggling to process this information. "So, who do you suspect is Laura Gates?" Adele gave a small, knowing smile. She had to be a woman in her 40s who had shown previous interest in this place. "And I can only think of one." "Who?" Galvin asked, his curiosity piqued. Adele turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Miss Thornhill." It makes sense why she went ballistic when she found out that Wednesday and Tyler were using this place as a dating venue. But I also had my contacts look into her while I was in Washington. She's squeaky clean on the outside. Galvin shook his head. So it's not Miss Thornhill? No, Adele clarified. I'm saying there's no evidence to prove she is Laura Gates. But you saw her reaction today when I said I bought this place. She looked disturbed for more than 10 seconds. Something's off. Galvin stared at her, his mind racing. So she's still a suspect. Adele nodded, her tone turning commanding. She's the only suspect we've got. Oh, and Sheriff, I don't plan on breaking my promises to the kids, so clean this up. With that, she walked away from the mansion, her mind already turning over the next steps in the game. The old Gates mansion, once a grand relic of the past, now stood under the harsh glow of police lights, surrounded by cruisers with their sirens muted but their presence undeniable. Inside, the basement was a chilling crime scene. Glass jars lined the shelves, each containing disembodied body parts suspended in clear solutions, eerily preserved. A mixture of water and formaldehyde kept the grim specimens intact, each jar carefully labeled as though they were some macabre exhibit. Sheriff Galvin moved cautiously around the room, his flashlight cutting through the dimness. He reached out and gingerly touched the lid of one jar, his expression grim. This isn't a bear attack, he muttered under his breath, feeling the weight of the discovery settle on his shoulders. Adele, standing nearby, folded her arms, watching the officers at work with a clinical detachment. Whoever did this, they were methodical. And theatrical. A twisted sense of drama. Sheriff Galvin nodded, still looking over the jars. As more officers arrived, the air inside the mansion grew thicker, the tension palpable. Outside, Mayor Walkner arrived, his stiff posture giving away his discomfort at the situation. He walked up to the sheriff, his voice tight. We need to seal this place off, Sheriff. This is beyond our control now. Adele, overhearing, chuckled darkly. Seal it off? Sure. Like you did last time, when people were just walking in and out. That worked great, didn't it, Mayor? The mayor blinked, caught off guard. What do you suggest we do, then? His voice was more defensive now. Adele stepped forward, her gaze piercing as she addressed both him and Sheriff Galvin. Tear it down. Principal Weems won't let students near this place after what they found. You saw the look on her face. And none of the kids want to go near it anymore. Except for Wednesday, of course. Her lips curled into a slight smirk. She's pretty upset she wasn't the one to find the body parts. The mayor opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw the determined set of Adele's jaw. We can just tear it down, he asked, clearly unsure. Adele's voice dropped to a low, commanding tone. Yes. I can. It's mine. And if I want to bring in a wrecking ball tomorrow, it'll happen. She turned on her heel, her confidence unshaken. Miss Thornhill, though, was not so unaffected. As word of the confiscated body parts spread, her rage simmered just below the surface. She had carefully preserved those specimens, each a testament to her twisted interests, and now they were gone. The authorities had taken them from her, and Miss Thornhill wasn't the type to take such a violation lightly. Her eyes burned with fury, but she kept her emotions tightly controlled. The next morning at Nevermore Academy, the tension around the Gates mansion lingered, and it only escalated when Adele addressed the students in the courtyard. Sorry, kids, she said with an air of authority. I had hoped to turn the old Gates mansion into a party hub. Unfortunately, the mayor, the sheriff's office, and the school have deemed it too dangerous. As you may have heard, wet specimens of the victims from the so-called bear attacks were discovered there. The authorities have now reclassified the deaths as homicides. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some students seemed relieved, others were eager for more details, but Adele's next words silenced the chatter. Because of that, she continued, none of you are allowed to go in the woods without adult supervision. We're also looking into demolishing the mansion to prevent it from being used for illegal activities. Her eyes flicked briefly to Miss Thornhill, who was standing among the students, her face unreadable. But even without words, it was clear that the news had struck a nerve. Later that week, in the greenhouse, the students were gathered for their botany class. The air smelled of rich soil and damp earth, but today, the scent was overshadowed by the sight that greeted them. The plants, once vibrant and full of life, were now a sad sight. Their leaves were limp, drooping as if they'd been drained of all vitality. Wednesday Addams stood at the door, her black uniform stark against the pale light streaming through the glass. Her eyes fixed on the wilted plants, her lips curling into a slight, dry smile. "I think we need a new botany teacher," Wednesday deadpanned, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "This one's broken. She can't even keep her plants alive." A few students chuckled nervously, but most were too shocked by the scene to speak. Miss Thornhill, standing by the plants, clenched her fists, her lips tightening as she struggled to maintain control. Eden, ever the one to share the latest gossip, pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the plants, capturing their lifeless state. She quickly uploaded it to her blog, her fingers flying over the screen. The plant's sudden demise. Guess Miss Thornhill's green thumb is actually a death wish for her students' plants. #NotSoBotanical, #PlantKiller. Within moments, the comments came pouring in, all of them a sharp, merciless commentary on Miss Thornhill's skills, or lack thereof. "I can't believe we're still stuck with this teacher. If she can't even keep a plant alive, how is she supposed to teach us? It's official, the plants are dead. The class is dead. Miss Thornhill should be next. Maybe she should teach grave gardening instead. Her plants have mastered the art of wilting. Isn't it ironic that she's a botany teacher, and every plant she touches dies? I heard Miss Thornhill's secret. She's been overwatering them," with her anger. The comments kept coming, each more scathing than the last. Miss Thornhill stood in the center of the room, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breath. The students' reactions were like salt in the wound, and she knew the whispers would continue long after class had ended. A few days later, Sheriff Galvin and Adele continued their investigation into the Gates mansion, their minds swirling with new leads and questions. But for now, the tension at Nevermore Academy had shifted, focusing on the failed botany class and its increasingly suspicious teacher. As the students speculated on the fate of the mansion and Miss Thornhill, the truth behind the sinister discoveries at the Gates mansion was slowly beginning to take shape, and with it, the certainty that some mysteries would remain buried forever. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series.